Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today to this webinar, which is about rebalancing EU CAP subsidies towards plant-based production with legal and policy recommendations for people, animals, and the planet. It is particularly timely as the next Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, post-2027, that will run over the 7 years period between 2028 and 2034 is currently under discussion in the European Union. Our speakers today are leading experts in EU food systems and animal protection in Europe and in France, and they will address key subjects around this topic and present their own NGO recommendations for the next CAP. So today, I will start this webinar with a short introduction about our work at Food Forward Europe before giving the floor to my colleague Alessandro Ricciuti as a keynote speaker, followed by our 4 panelists, Christine Leidner from the European Vegetarian Union, Olivier Morice from L214, Clemence Peyrot from ObSAF, and Morgan Janowicz from the Green Rev Institute. Their presentations will be followed by a panel discussion and a Q&A handled by my colleague Mina Akauya. During this event, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box below. And this webinar is recorded. You also have translated captions available on the right side of the Zoom bar below. So I'm now pleased to introduce our recent work at Food Forward Europe. So last month, we released our first report titled Future-Proofing the CAP, Rebalancing EU Subsidies Toward Plant-Based Production, and providing a legal assessment and policy proposal for the next CAP. It addresses the structural imbalances of the current subsidies allocated by the Common Agricultural Policy, still massively funding the livestock sector directly or indirectly through feed-dependent system, and the legal exposure of such an imbalance, raising some legal inconsistencies with legal obligations related to climate, environmental protection, animal welfare, but also human health. Therefore, as lawyers ourselves at Food Forward Europe, we also wanted to explore some litigation pathways to challenge the CAP in case this structure remains so unbalanced. So we are basing our analysis on existing precedents, but also exploring new pathways with regards to the growing CAP legal vulnerabilities. And finally, we provide our policy main recommendation, which is to relocate at least 20% of CAP support that currently benefit to the livestock industry toward the plant-based protein production for human consumption. So I really invite you to go and see this report or its executive summary if you're interested. And my colleague Mina is sharing the link in the chat. Today, the big news is that we are releasing our joint statements because we saw that our message is also aligned with other organizations working for better animal protection and also for more plant-based food system in Europe. So this joint statement is pretty clear. It reminds the problem of this structural imbalance favoring the livestock sector and the very minor support allocated to plant protein for human consumption, our ask for this 20% more reallocation to start a meaningful and systemic shift for more sustainable food systems, as also a legal necessity, because if we want to be aligned with current EU legal obligations for the environment, for animal welfare, for the climate, we also need to make this shift happen. And also to be coherent with some EU policy commitments, like, for instance, the Green Deal or the Farm to Fork strategy. Why it can be good for farmers? Because it would support the transition to this sustainable agriculture and more plant protein food systems. It's also good for Europe because it would reinforce food security with protein autonomy and sovereignty. Because for plant protein, as you may know, we still rely a lot on imports, especially for soy and other legumes. And we believe that the next CAP and the current discussions for this next CAP provide a unique opportunity to be a game changer and to start this meaningful, needed, and urgent shift for people, animals, and the planet. So you see, we are here with our first key partners, and we really encourage you as NGOs to join us and sign on. And you can do it in filling the form that Mina is sharing in the chat, where you can see the link to the joint statement at the start. And then you can endorse this statement on our site if you want. So please consider doing it to have a strong message to send to EU policymakers that we want this shift to happen. So I am now pleased to introduce my colleague, Alessandro, who will follow up with our key finding on our reports. First, let me shortly introduce him. So, Alessandro is a lawyer specializing in animal protection and food system transformation. He is the president of Animal Law Italia and the founder of Redefine Food, ReFood in short. Last year, he joined us at Food Forward Europe as head of EU strategy. In his keynote, he will present the key findings of our recent report, including our key policy and legal recommendations for the current CAP reform. Dear Alessandro, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Sabine, and good afternoon, everyone. As you can see on the screen, we have some key findings from our report. The first finding is that the CAP's allocation model structurally locks in animal-based protein systems. The CAP is the EU's largest spending program, accounting for 378 billion in the 2021-2027 period. And following the money, the striking reality is that roughly 82% of that support directly or indirectly sustains livestock and feed-dependent systems. More than 70% of the EU agricultural land is linked to livestock, and 2/3 of the EU cereal production is used as animal feed and not for food. The second finding is that the CAP contributes to EU dependence on important protein feed. Concretely, this means that 94% of the soy protein used by EU livestock is imported, mostly from Brazil, Argentina, and the United States. The same CAP framework that should support strategic autonomy is in fact reinforcing our dependence on global feed markets. The third finding is that a significant share of EU agricultural expenditure sustains emission-intensive feed-dependent systems. Once you include feed production, livestock accounts for up to 86% of total EU agricultural emissions. The CAP basically is helping to fund that footprint. Now we can advance to the second slide regarding the legal framework. The first point is that the CAP's current allocation pattern is increasingly misaligned with EU law and policy frameworks that impose binding obligations on how EU money is spent. We talk about the principles of environmental integration, respect of animals as sentient beings, and the 55% emissions reduction target for 2030 set by the EU climate law. And the Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, and the EU's plant protein autonomy objective all point towards the same way. CAP allocation is increasingly out of step with all these targets. The second point is that CAP spending is now subject to growing judicial scrutiny. This shift towards accountability is no longer hypothetical because recent climate and environmental litigation across Europe show that courts are increasingly willing to examine whether public expenditure programs remain consistent with binding EU commitments, and the CAP will not be an exception. So we can advance to the final slide about our recommendation. Basically, okay. The central proposal of the report, the first item on screen, is that 20% of the support currently benefiting livestock and feed-dependent systems should be reallocated towards plant-based proteins for human consumption. A fiscally neutral measure which is structurally transformative. It still leaves most of the CAP support directly to livestock, but it does four things at once. Firstly, it delivers coupled support, agri-environmental actions, and investment aid for legumes, pulses, and other plant proteins for food. Second, it is phased, starting from a 5% by 2030 up to a 20% by 2034, giving farmers and member states time to adapt. Thirdly, it builds the missing value chain, storage, processing, and market access. Fourth, it draws a clear legal line between protein crops for food and protein crops for feed. The second recommendation on screen is the indispensable other half of the equation. Without demand-side measures, which means public procurement, market incentives, dietary guidelines, the CAP reform alone will not deliver a sustainable food transition. Supply and demand have to move together. So, to conclude, the post-2027 CAP is being decided now. It will run until 2034, and this is the window. The question is no longer whether the CAP will change, but whether it will change proactively through policy or reactively through the courts. And we are ready for that evidence. Thank you. I look forward to the conversation with our speaker.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. It was a very, very clear presentation. And I'm now pleased to introduce our first panelist, Christine Leidner. So Christine is the policy manager at the European Vegetarian Union, EVU, representing 49 organizations across Europe and advocating for a sustainable food transition and stronger support for plant-based food system. With a background in international and European law, including animal law, she previously worked for 6 years in the European Parliament on agriculture, environment, and animal transport policies. In her intervention today, Protein Diversification, How the Next CAP Can Support Farmers, she will examine whether the current CAP reform proposals can genuinely support farmers in diversifying and scaling up plant-based food production. So, dear Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabine. I hope you can all see the presentation fine. It looks a bit weird on my screen.
Yes, it's great.
Okay. You already presented EVU, so we are an umbrella organization. We have different kinds of organizations, but mostly vegetarian and vegan organizations in our network, or just, plant-based advocates, as we call them as well. Sometimes politically it can make sense in Brussels. I will not go too much into this. If you have any questions, just maybe what we do is we engage with policymakers, but we also really try to engage with our members and bring our members to Brussels. And then also we work together on a big campaign for a plant-based action plan at EU level. And we also help our members develop action plans for plant-based foods at national level in coalitions. And yeah, because I had a background working on the CAP, when the proposals came out, I volunteered to have a look at the proposals. So it's not just the CAP proposal itself, it's all the relevant proposals. And I am aware this looks a bit like a box on cigarettes. But yeah, the overall assessment is a mixed one. We do see potential, but we also see a lot of uncertainty. And there's definitely a lot of entryways, and there's a lot of points where, with a bit of improvement, we can make sure that there is something in there for diversification. We did frame the analysis. I will post the link to the full 29-page analysis in the chat later. We did frame it under protein diversification, but in general, it's not just protein. I mean, we support all kinds of plant-based foods, the development of all kinds of plant-based foods, and also support for farmers for all kinds of plant-based foods. So don't focus too much on protein. And then also in the analysis, we did not look at the school scheme, so the distribution of foods in schools. And we also did not look at promotion policy. It was really more on the production side of the CAP. I will not go into too much detail. Again, if you have more technical questions, you can always reach out. So just making sure I have the time. Maybe some new elements that are very positive, and it's the first time that they're there. There is a mention of diversification, and there is a mention of transition. So in the new environmental measures in the CAP, there is this idea to have a multi-annual transition scheme where farmers can apply. It's up to 200,000 euros per holding. They have to come up with a transition plan. And we did ask the Commission specifically behind closed doors, could this be used for a diversification plan or a move towards, sustainable plant production? And the Commission said yes. So we think farmers could use this to move into plant or plant protein production. Already a negative element here is that it is not clear what the procedure will be. It is not clear if it's going to be the same procedure in all the member states, and farmers will have to come up with a big transition plan. And they seem already overwhelmed, or they are already overwhelmed with administrative burden. So that's something we're a bit worried about. And we really ask policymakers to think of this to make it a really easily accessible measure and not something that will not be accessible in practical terms. And then also for diversification, if you go to the article on environmentally sensitive areas, there is a very nice proposal of the Commission that member states should offer diversification or extensification support to farmers in areas that suffer from nitrate surplus. This is good, but we would like to see this extended to areas that are at risk of nitrate surplus, not already, up to here in animal shit, if I pardon my French, but yeah, also that it can be a preventive measure. And we also fear a bit that extensification, which is good, we support this, of course, but we don't just want to pay farmers to produce less and to produce animals in another way, but we also want to offer them alternative business models. That's why really making sure that every farmer has access to diversification support is really crucial for us. Another positive element is on coupled income support. We're not huge fans of coupled income support as such, so that's money that goes specifically to one production. Of course, it is something that is here to stay, and it is even becoming more important in the next CAP. That's what the Commission wants. If it exists, then of course we would rather see it go towards plant productions. And there is the proposal that there is an increase for plant protein, that you can basically give more coupled income support if it goes to plant protein, which we are supportive of. But we also really say it's not enough to just support the production. You also need to think of the value chain afterwards. And the worst thing that can happen for a farmer is that they produce a crop that you've paid them to produce, and then they cannot sell it and they sit on it. That's also not ideal. And then just a small detail, there is a proposal for member states to set limits, livestock density limits for coupled income support. But the bad news is that it's not going to survive. It's probably not going to survive the negotiations, because even in the Environment Committee, it's already being taken out. So yeah. And then last positive point is the creation of a protein sector under the Common Market Organization regulation. So that would mean that member states would have to create a protein sector, meaning they have to recognize producer organizations, and they have to propose what is called sectoral interventions. So that would mean support for stocking, investment support into processing infrastructure, all kinds of measures that already exist, for example, in the olive oil sector. But it will really help making the protein, what I said before, developing these value chains that would really help building this whole plant protein sector, which is what farmers are also asking us. And then their positive is that the parliament is very supportive, but member states are not so supportive because they don't want to have another mandatory sector to recognize. So to be continued. Just maybe, Alessandro, where am I on time?
You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes? Okay. The negative elements, I mean, as you probably all know and you've seen in the news, there was a lot of uncertainty around the budget. The whole new structure is the cap has been put into this national and regional partnership fund. It wasn't clear how much was exactly for the cap. Now we know member states will be able to define how much they want to give to the cap, but it will be in a struggle with other policies. And then also within the cap, there is no longer the two-pillar structure, which used to be the cap and then rural development. So there is a lot of uncertainty as to how much funding there will be for each measure, each type of measure. And on the farmer side, there is a lot of uncertainty, and that's not really helping like a constructive, debate and approach. And then feeding into that also is the flexibility that member states have in the Commission proposals. There is a lot of flexibility on the goal setting, but then also how the budget will be allocated and to what. And so we fear that there won't really be a common agriculture policy at this point in the next cap. Also, for example, on environmental measures. The last two really negative elements, the lack of environmental ambition, at least at the EU level, I already mentioned it. There is no ring-fenced funding. And then also there is really weakened rules on environmental protection. And there are a lot of measures that are supportive of diversification, for example, crop rotation, crop rotation has disappeared, but we also know that producing more plants and diverse plants and environmental protection go hand in hand. So a reduction of the environmental ambition is not really, where we want to go also. And then lastly, we were hoping to have a lot more protein diversification, like as a theme in the proposals, as an objective, or at least somewhere as a byline, but it's really not mentioned at all. And so we also don't know how the Commission's protein plan, which is supposed to come out on July 7th, how it will interact with the cap that is already on the table. Okay, very quickly, main recommendations. I already mentioned them: extending the diversification scheme, really focusing on transition diversification for the transition schemes and also the young farmer program. We want to also have, of course, for investment support, like really focus on diversification and plant production. Coupled payments I already mentioned. We want to focus on plants as well. And then my personal favorite is talking to farmers. There is no advice for farmers that want to diversify or that want to go to plant production. There is, but it's like private organizations, it's NGOs. So we would like to have the state, the official advisory services providing a diversification check, like when you want to move to organic, but you can go there and say, I want to produce more plants, I want to produce protein crops, what can I do on my farm? And this is something that we would love to see in all 27 member states. And then maybe last point here, it is in the making to have a specific article on protein crops. It's now called the Protein Starter Pack. This is something that is being worked on in the Parliament, which would be a listing of all the schemes and all the measures for protein crops, just to give it more visibility And this is something that we're hopeful will make it at least in the Parliament's position. And yes, I think this I can kind of skip. It's kind of self-explanatory. And the main messages were already kind of in what I said, so I can also skip. Maybe just 30 seconds. You will all get an invite, or you will see on our social media. We are hosting an event at the European Parliament on June 24th in the presence of Commissioner for Agriculture Christoph Hansen, because after doing this analysis, we realized we really need to go talk to farmers on what they need. So this is what we did. We interviewed 30 farmers together with plenty of member organizations, including our members, and we will present this report and kind of the lessons and the recommendations from this report at the Parliament. And yeah, it's open to anyone who's interested. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. Do you know if this event will be hybrid?
Yes, there will be a live stream.
Oh, wonderful. So I saw Mina shared the link to your EVU report. So the full analysis is included in the page already. But if you have a link already for the event on the 24th June that you can share.
We're launching registration later this week. So it's
Okay.
not, yeah.
Okay, in case you can send it to me, and I will be happy to share it to our participants today in case they're interested to join. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation, Christine. It provides really a good overview of the positive and negative aspects of the current discussions for the next CAP, and especially for plant-based food and protein systems. So thank you so much for that. I will now pass it on to our next speaker, who is Olivier Morice. So Olivier is the EU Public Affairs Officer at the French animal protection organization called L214, which he joined in 2021 following years of activism in the animal protection movement. In his intervention, Unlocking Public Debate to Drive Change in the Food System, Olivier will explore how unlocking public debate can act as a key lever to transform food systems. So, dear Olivier, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, dear Sabine. So what is on the screen is the cover of our report, and it's about saving half of the animals in Europe and animals in farms. So L214 is an animal rights organization focused on animals used as food products, so meat, dairy, eggs, fish, and what we do is investigation, scientific research, field work also, and we document the reality of farming and slaughtering in Europe. And so today I'm here to talk about the public debate around meat, which is kind of locked, and try to think about ways to unlock it, and see also why public subsidies and cap subsidies lock this debate. So first of all, I'm sorry, by the way, I will focus a lot of on the French situation. So, but it's roughly comparable to other countries in Europe. So I'm sorry if I focus too much on France. But so first of all, what's the situation with regard to meat consumption in France? Well, French people consume twice as much meat as the global average. So it's, of course, way too much. It's around 83 kilos per person and per year. And meats also represent a major share of the food spending of people here in France, while plant protein remains quite marginal. So the level of consumption in France exceeds both environmental and also nutritional recommendation, of course. But in the meantime, French people believe that they are eating less meat. Surveys suggest that, and it's quite intriguing because So if we believe that at first glance, we could think that dietary habits are evolving, but actual consumption remains largely unchanged. I mean, it changed a little bit over the years. Over the past 20 years, actually, it decreased by only 6%, which is really marginal over 20 years. But the problem is that people believe they eat less meat because they switched to red meat, red meat to poultry mainly, which is because it's just cheaper and perceived also as healthier. So as a result, the number of animals killed continues to increase, which is exactly what we don't want to see. And we all know why meat reduction matters, because of course reducing the consumption of meat has huge impacts on animals, of course, but also on the climate and environment, public health, so deforestation. So for all these reasons, it's really important to go forward and to really significantly decrease the consumption of meat. And also scientists agreed on that, and they worked on different scenarios in order to find out how could we think about a sustainable society and a sustainable food system. And all the scenarios that we've analyzed go in the same direction. And I'm talking about ADEME, Solagro, IDRI, Climate Action Network, or CNRS. The recommendation is to cut by half to 70% of meat, and of course increase legumes, fruit, vegetables, plant-based proteins in general. So, in other words, our aim to cut by half, to reduce by half the number of animals that we killed, is kind of almost conservative if we compare it to what scientists believe. But so there is a strong agreement on that, but very little changes at the end of the day. So why? And one of the main reasons why is because public debate is locked. And it remains extremely constrained. It's very hard to talk about that. Organizations, researchers, companies, NGOs, even farmers who can question the system sometimes face backlash from the industry, from farmers' union, from political actors also. It can be pressure also on international institutions such as the FAO or IPCC, threats against NGOs, journalists, and in France, for example, L214 has been criminalized through political speeches, rhetoric, and subject to threats. And so it's very difficult even for big organizations or public figures to try to say loudly that, yeah, we need to reduce meat, which is kind of frightening. And also the market is rigged because the meat industry is in control, basically. The food environment, which is controlled by the meat company, drives overconsumption. Consumers, when they go to the supermarket, restaurants, when they see advertising, so when they go to their social media platforms, they are driven to overconsumption of meat. While plant-based alternatives remain quite marginal in comparison in terms of marketing and in terms of just presence in the shelves of the supermarket. For example, in France, around 80% of ready-made meals contain fish or meat in French supermarket. So the meat industry benefits also from powerful marketing and pricing strategies. Studies showed that meat products receive far more promotional support than fruits, vegetables, or legumes. And at the same time, the economic system externalizes many of the costs of the meat production because it's public money that pays for public health costs, for climate impacts, for environmental degradation. And in the same time, farmers themselves remain quite often very fragile, despite being central to the system. They earn very little money. And this strength of the mid sector, we have to acknowledge that it comes for a big part from the subsidies they received from the cap. Livestock farming places a very heavy burden on public finances, and like you said in the introduction, they receive a huge chunk of the subsidies of the cap. I found the figure of 82% of EU agricultural subsidies that are devoted directly to animal production, which is 38%, and indirectly through feed production, 44%. We had roughly the same figures. And the same animal products are responsible for 84% of greenhouse gas emission, while providing only 35% of calories. And in France, because I said I would focus a lot in France. In France, cattle, sheep, and goat farms are all subsidized. 96% of pig farms and 85% of poultry farms are subsidized, with a total amount each year of 4.3 billion euros in public subsidies, just dedicated to cattle farming, which is like this sector which receives the most subsidies in France. And it received so much subsidies that the French Court of Auditors noted that the economic model of cattle farming was really fragile and just dependent on high level of public subsidies, and therefore it was not sustainable. Also, the animal production benefits from reduced production costs due to subsidies supporting feed production. And basically, without these subsidies, around half of sheep and goat farms and beef farms would have operated at a negative gross operating surplus in 2022. So, the problem with all that is that they receive a lot of money, and it does not go to the farmers. The animal farmers, they stay very poor. They are among the poorest in France, and so it's not a good deal for them either. So we have to change the situation basically, and we wondered how to unlock the public debate and how can we break through it. And of course, Sabine, I see you raised your hand, so I reached the 10 minutes allocated time. So the debate, like I said, is particularly sensitive because the industry defends its economic ambitions while farmers fear for their livelihoods. So it's very sensitive. And so to unlock the public debate means that we've got to address farmers' working condition and to offer immediate solution for them. Because if we ignore the socio-economic dimension of the transition, it means that we will face total resistance from them. And the transition we advocate for must clearly mean zero job loss and a better deal for animal farmers. And we've got to be really clear on that. And we need to address the issue on all fronts simultaneously, like to talk to farmers, to also offer a market for plant-based sector. To involve major retailers, to involve food processing industries, to involve also public catering, and also to involve, of course, farmers, and to really address their challenges, especially the debt they face, because farmers in France and in Europe are trapped in a system that pushes them to produce more and more, and they've got to find a market for that. So, conclusion, we have to address farmers' situation and to talk directly to them and to think about the big picture. And I believe that Sabine will circulate this report. There is the French version that's longer and also the executive summary in English. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Olivier. So yes, the French report was shared on the chat. And so we will be very happy to circulate the executive summary in English when you will have the link ready to be shared, Olivier. And yes, thank you so much. I really hope that we can find all the data and numbers that you shared on the report or the executive summary because it's really striking. And yes, I mean, a lot of things to say, but yes, for time's sake, I will now hand over to our next speaker, who is Clemence Peyrot. So Clemence is the president of the French Observatory for Agricultural Subsidy and Aid, called ObSAF, which analyzes and monitors public funding allocated to agriculture at the French and European levels. In her intervention, Public Subsidies and CAP Inconsistencies, the case of foie gras sector in France. Clemence will present the key finding of their ObSAF report on public subsidies allocated to the foie gras sector in southwest of France. And yes, it's also very striking to hear. So Clemence, now the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Sabine. I have just a technical issue. I can't share my PowerPoint now.
All right.
Can you?
So I will share this. Try to share your presentation for you.
So sorry. Thank you so much.
No worries. So maybe if you want to start the introduction while I'm searching for the document, that will be amazing.
Thank you. So the Observatory of Agricultural Subsidies and Aid in France, so ObSAF, aims to inform citizens and policymakers about public money allocated to agriculture. And in December, we published a report that maps the public aid allocated to the foie gras sector in Nouvelle-Aquitaine, an area in France. And we analyze the structural dependence of this sector on public funding, as well as the consistency of this support in light of climate, environmental, and of course, ethical issue. So I'm gonna try to introduce this report quickly.
Yes, sorry, Clemence, to interrupt. I shared the screen. Just let me know when you want me to shift the slide.
Yes, can you shift, please? So the foie gras sector, I'm gonna start with the basics. It relies on a long production chain, hatching, farming, force feeding, of course, slaughter and processing, and it's dominated by cooperative and industrial groups. And while small-scale farms are becoming increasingly rare in France, because between 2010 and 2020, the number of farms fell by 47% in Nouvelle-Aquitaine, while the average size of farms almost doubled. So it's a very high process of intensification, and this concentration makes the sector extremely vulnerable to health crises, as shown by vaccination campaign financed by public funds, 90 million euro in 2021, 100 million euro between 2023 and 2024, and 64 million euro in 2025. So there is a real structural fragility of the production system. Can you switch? The analysis is based on a review of administrative documents relating to aid granted between 2022 and 2025 by the department and the Nouvelle Aquitaine region. So access to this document is a right in France, yet we are facing a large opacity of certain administration, and we are forced to refer the matter to court in France. So we also requested the document at the national level from the Ministry of Agriculture, but here again, a lot of opacity, and we have not received a response, and we will have to take legal action also. Can you swift? Thank you. So building a typology of financial aid came up against two major obstacles for this report. The first one is the heterogeneity of stakeholders and the opacity of long supply chains, which make it very difficult to identify the actual beneficiary of the aid, as well as the absence of breakdowns by production units, which prevents the precise isolation of the share of aid allocated to foie gras in the mixed farming system. So in this context, we identify three broad categories of aid: farming, processing, and the trio, communication, cooperation, and innovation. Can you go to the next one? The analysis of the administrative documents often highlights foie gras sector that is structurally kept on financial life support and was continually dependent on repeated and massive recourse to public aid. So between 2022 and 2025, 30.8 million euro in subsidies was mobilized, nearly 60% of which came from European funds and more than 35% from the region. Only a few countries in Europe are authorized to produce foie gras. This means that some countries that have explicitly banned foie gras production in their borders finance foie gras production in France using public funds from the CAP. And the year 2022 alone accounted for 63% of this amount, and it's reflecting the exceptional support deployed after the avian influenza crisis. And all the information in our report come from administrative documents. So we have not included national data on vaccination, for example, due to the lack of reference of the Ministry of Agriculture. Can you go to the next one? A detailed review of this aid reveal an unbalanced architecture because farm modernization plan alone absorbed more than 7 million, and it's mainly devoted to biosecurity in a context of recurring health crises. So it's very far from reducing vulnerabilities because this investment help maintaining a highly intensive model, and a lot of parameters are in change, like high stocking density, integrated flows, territorial concentration, etc. Can you go on the next one? Thank you. So downstream, long chain processing industries receive the majority of processing heads, and it's consolidating the central position in the value chain, contrary to the heritage-based narrative promoted in public communication. Farm-based workshop and artisanal model account for only 3% of processing heads. And on the next slide, finally, there is aid for communication, innovation, and cooperation, and more than 315,000 euros in 2024 for the promotion of the Southwest label alone. And it's just an example. It's playing a key role in stabilizing the sector's narrative and maintaining a heritage-based image very disconnected from the technical reality, such as confinement, prolonged indoor housing, and industrial standardization, etc. On the next slide, please. Overall, all these data of our report converge toward a clear diagnosis. Public money does not mitigate the fragility of the dominant model. It ensures its continuity. So the sector rely on a recurring support regime, economic, sanitary, and symbolic, and that absorb crisis without breaking structural transformation. So ObSAF recommends a profound overhaul of the way public head is allocated, structured around 4 priorities: transparency, conditionality, transition, and stronger democratic oversight. So the first recommendation is to improving the transparency and the traceability of public heads. We ask to access to administrative documents, and it must be effective in order to allow rigorous monitoring of public action. We also ask that the head application should include a precise breakdown by production unit, which is essential to isolate the share of funding actually devoted to foie gras or another sector in a mixed farming system. And in addition, cooperative receiving public subsidies should be required to declare annually which farm benefits from them in order to end the opacity currently surrounding the international redistribution. The second recommendation is to make a call for made conditional on clear objective of ecological transition and reduction of animal suffering in the light of European commitments like the Green Deal, the Farm to Fork, the national commitment, also in France, like the National Low Carbon Strategy, EGalim, and we also have regional commitments. Because public funding can no longer continue to support an intensive farming model based on force feeding. So we also call for the immediate regulation of communication financed by public money, and we recommend ending public subsidies intending to promote a project based on a contested practice. The third recommendation is to support farm towards a plant-based transition, because supporting the transition is an essential lever for helping territories and farms to change their production system. So the development of plant-based crop in historically specialized regions, the socio-economic security of farmer, and the adaptation of training scheme are essential to enable variable conversion. And for this objective, the coordinated mobilization of the CAP and the country appear very decisive to finance innovation, support alternative, and guarantee an agroecological transition that preserve incomes and professional pathways. And the last recommendation is to strengthening democratic oversight, because the coherence and credibility of public action require stronger democratic oversight. The lobby activity of the interprofessional organization and its intermediary must be fully declared to the high authority for transparency in public life as required by regulation. And it's actually not how it's done. Giving the structural gap between the promises made by label and the reality of production method in case of prolonged confinement linked to an event crisis, ObSAF consider it necessary to realign official label with the practice they actually guarantee.
I'm sorry, Clemence, I need to ask you to reach to the very end, please.
Yeah, it's okay. I finish right now, so.
Okay, wonderful.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for these efforts to present in English today, because it's really appreciated also to have your inputs on the foie gras sector in France. It's crazy to realize that indeed the EU has banned force feeding practices in the animal farming directive in 98, sorry, and that, as you said, member states already having banned this practice because of its cruelty and so on, currently found this through the CAP subsidies. We can say the same for bullfighting, for instance, which receive also some CAP subsidies. So yes, and thank you also for all the work you are doing and going to court to have the proof of how our public funding are subsidizing these animal farms. So yes, thank you very much for this key example, and it's very worth it to know, I believe, also for an international and European audience. So thank you very much again, Clemence, and I'm now happy to hand over to Morgan Janowicz. So I will shortly introduce Morgan before she jumps in. So our dear Morgan is the board member of the Green Rev Institute and vice president of the Safe Food Federation. In our intervention today, following the money, mapping CAP subsidies and the justice gap in EU food system, Morgan will explore how EU agricultural subsidies shape food system production patterns and environmental outcomes. So, dear Morgan, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. And without further ado, I will just jump straight to the today's agenda. So we have 4 parts. First, I will introduce you to who we are as Green Rev Institutes very briefly, and what AgriWatch and Free From Farm actually is on the ground. And then we will look at CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, and how we've been mapping where public money flows in the EU agriculture. Third, I will explain what current flow of the money preserves deep inequality in the food system. And finally, I will share our concrete recommendations for rebalancing subsidies. So let's jump straight into the topic. GreenRef Institute was founded 12 years ago in Poland, initially as a watchdog organization. Today we operate across two main pillars. The first is advocacy and expert work, monitoring legislation, analyzing public spending, engaging with parliamentary committees, ministries, and EU institutions. And the second pillar is mobilization and network building, creating space for consumers, citizens, and civil society organizations who are in many ways, as we are aware, the victims of the current food system. And our programs include AgriWatch, Free from Farm, Plant-Based School, which you have heard of, given our recent landmark regulation ensuring plant-based meals in Polish schools, kindergartens, and hospitals. Then we've got the Future Food for Climate Coalition, a film program, and a new Safe Food portal and magazine. So everything what we do is evidence-based, data-driven action for this systemic change. And going straight to the AgriWatch and Free from Farm, let me tell you specifically about the two programs that are most relevant for this topic today. So AgriWatch is our civic oversight tool through freedom of information requests, parliamentary committee participation, and legislative tracking. We monitor how public money is spent on agriculture at both national and the EU level. So some of what we've encountered: Poland paid over 17 billion zloty in direct support to animal agriculture sector between 2020 and 2024. We flagged significant delays in the implementation of the EU antibiotic regulation, Regulation 2019/6, which is meant to restrict preventive antibiotic use in animal agriculture. And in 2025, we filed a formal complaint to the EU Ombudsperson against the European Commission for abandoning the Sustainable Food System Law, which legislation that had been developed through a consultation with over 2,600 participants. Then we've got Free from Farm. It's our impact mapping program. It maps EU subsidy flows, analyzes their coherence, or rather incoherence in this case, with the EU Green Deal commitments, and builds the evidence base for policy reform towards these plant-based protein systems. And the core finding is very stark. Money follows factory farming, not public health, not climate goals, not consumer rights. So this is just to keep in mind. Then going further, now let's talk about the CAP itself. So the CAP is Europe's largest spending program with a budget of approximately 387 billion for 2023 to 2027. It is the single biggest level for food system transformation. If you want to change food system in Europe, you cannot avoid the CAP. It operates through two main pillars. So the first pillar is direct payments, accounts for around 70% of the CAP budget. It provides income support paid per hectare. In practice, this means that larger farms and particularly large intensive animal agriculture operations receive the most money. It is structurally biased towards scale, not sustainability. And the second pillar, rural development, the remaining 30% is co-founded with member states and is meant to support agri-environmental schemes, organic farming, and rural infrastructure. In theory, it's more targeted. In practice, it's often poorly designed and insufficiently ambitious. But at this, and this is a very crucial part, the CAP is not the only source of public money flowing into agriculture. Our AgriWatch and Free from Farm work maps a much broader landscape. So we've got the EU structural funds, we've got the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, national subsidies for meat and dairy promotions, biogas, biomethane, infrastructure grants, Horizon Europe, Erasmus Plus, and so on and so on. When you look at the full picture, the concentration of public support towards high emission, resource intensive animal based production becomes even more striking. And let me show you what this looks like in practice with Poland as a case study. Using a Freedom of Information request, we obtained data from the Polish Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. What you see on this slide is what they were able or maybe willing to provide. And already, even with incomplete data, the picture is telling very much. 17 billion zloty, Polish zloty, went to animal production in just 4 years between 2024 and 2024. The largest category by far, direct payments, direct supports tied to the number of animals. But there's a transparency problem when we ask for a full breakdown for how much goes to plant crops for human food versus feed crops for animals. The ministry could not answer. They simply don't collect that data. And plant-based crop support is not separated into food crops versus feed crops in the official reporting system. So this is absolutely not an accident. When data is not collected, accountability is impossible. Citizens cannot know how much of their money goes to subsidizing meat and dairy versus, for example, lentils. And that opacity is itself a form of power. So when we look at individual beneficiaries through open subsidy database in Poland and elsewhere, the picture became even sharper. A small number, very small number of very large producers and international corporations were capturing support across multiple programs at the same time. So why does this matter? Why do we call this a justice gap as Greenref Institute? Well, let me walk you through different dimensions of the problem. So first, there's a concentration of wealth. A first pillar pays per hectare. Large industrial farms receive the most. Small farmers and local producers, the one who could support sustainable local food systems, are marginalized. And the CAP was originally designed to support farming communities. In practice, it has become a mechanism that concentrates wealth in the hands of large agro-businesses. The second thing is the plant protein gap. The EU has talked extensively about protein autonomy, reducing dependence on imported soya, but there is virtually no dedicated support for domestic legume and plant protein production intended for human consumption, because we're talking about human consumption here. Feed crops and food crops are not even distinguished in subsidy data. The result, subsidies undermine the very food sovereignty goals that the EU claims to have and to pursue. Then we got the third aspect, which is opacity of spending, as I described with Polish Ministry of Agriculture, when they cannot even tell how much money goes to animal versus plant production. Something is fundamentally wrong with the accountability framework. This is not a technical data problem. This is a political choice not to know. And the fourth aspect is public health cost. Even every euro that subsidizes intensive animal agriculture is also indirectly a euro or Polish zloty or whatever, subsidizing antibiotic resistance, disease risk, and diet-related illnesses. Over 30% of cancer are linked to diet as of today. The healthcare crisis in Europe, aging population, post-COVID diagnostic backlogs, overstretched public system, this cannot be solved while we at the same time pour public money into producing food that drives disease and all the crises. And these costs are borne by citizens and, of course, public health system, not by industry that profits. And going further, let me make this concrete with four case studies from our work. So case first is the antibiotic resistance. The EU regulation 2019/6 restricts preventive antibiotic use in animal agriculture, and Poland has not yet implemented it Meanwhile, public subsidies continue to flow to the very sector, to this sector whose practices are accelerating one of the greatest public health threats of this century. We keep raising this. We keep getting passed between ministries. Deregulation travels from desk to desk, while antibiotic travel from farm to people on our plates. Case number 2 is the European Bank for the Reconstruction and Development Fast Food Investment in 2025. Greenref Institute, with a coalition of 75 NGOs opposing a planned investment of over 40 million in the expansion of Burger King and Poppy Eyes across Central and Eastern Europe. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, a public institution, which is a public institution, this is worth to understand, was about to use public money to expand fast food chains dependent on factory farms. We opposed it publicly, and the investment was cancelled. And this is a proof that watchdog action works very, very much when we mobilize. And there is a case number 3, so it's a complaint to the EU Ombudsperson. The Sustainable Food System Law was one of the most ambitious legislative proposals in the EU food policy in decades, developed after a consultation with over nearly 3,000 participants, citizens of the European Union, NGOs, businesses, experts, and so on. The European Commission quietly dropped it. In 2025, we filed a formal complaint to the EU Ombudsperson. The Ombudsperson called on the Commission to provide explanation, and this legislation would have created, for the first time, accountability for, among others, of course, retailers, large producers, and member states within the food system. Its abandonment was not, again, technical decision, it was a political one. And the case 4 is Stop Biomethane. Rush coalition. We are, as Greenref Institute, we're part of a growing coalition opposition to opposing the blind expansion of biomethane subsidies. And these installations are presented as green energy solutions, but they encourage more intensive animal agriculture. This is greenwashing at scale. We're locking in high emission agriculture under the label of climate transition. So what do we call for? So of course, a national food safety strategy. Poland does not have one. We need a cross-sectoral legal framework that grants food access with a human rights rooted in the constitutional law, EU law, and the UN SDGs. Then there's a reform, cap spending priorities, which is redirecting funds towards plant-based protein production for human consumption, short supply chains, and local food systems. Then number 3, full subsidy transparency, a mandatory public registry of all agricultural and environmental subsidy beneficiaries, including indirect support via feed crops and insurance. Then number 4, there's a EU antibiotic regulation immediately. Delayed implementation of regulation is not just a policy failure, it is a violation of the EU law. And then number 5, we've got health impact assessment for agricultural investments. All public funded agricultural investments at national and local level should be subjected to mandatory impact assessment. We cannot keep finding investments whose health costs where we refuse to measure. The 6th one is restrict biomethane subsidies, and the 7th one is the strengthened civic oversight. Watchdog organizations must have a right to participate in consultation and monitoring of public funded programs. Civil society is not a stakeholder to be tolerated. It is an essential accountability mechanism. Thank you so much. And Sabine, I know that you have raised your hand, so I'll stop sharing and stop talk.
Thank you so much, Morgan. It was a brilliant presentation. Serializing this opacity of the CAP funding allocation and the lack of transparency of how our public funds are going. And of course, what we know is that at least barely 45 billion euros of the CAP global envelope every year is funding animal farming directly or indirectly again. So as you clearly raised against all the value for public health, environment, climate, animal welfare, and so on. So yes, thank you for insisting on that very, very important point again. Um, now, pleased to hand it over to my dear colleague Mina Akaoya, who is the head of partnership as Food Forward Europe. I saw we have a question on the Q&A, and there's probably panel questions that can be raised amongst you. I would have some as well. I mean, please feel free. Christine, your hand is raised, and then Mina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sabine, and thank you for the great presentations, all of you. So we will now move into the panel discussion, and I would like to welcome all the speakers to join us. So, and to start, I would like to ask you a question that we actually quite often. So, how would you respond to critics who argue that rebalancing the CAP subsidies is some kind of threat to the farming community and food security? Alessandro, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Mina, for this question. Well, actually, we are talking about rebalancing, so we are not talking about phasing out subsidies. We just want to shift the balance, and this means that, for instance, we want to make it more equal because now the largest landowners are beneficiaries, are taking the 63% of payments. So this also pushes young farmers out, and I mean, this is a mean of avoiding concentrating all the support in a few hands, and also on the food security part of your question, I'd say that our system is not balanced at the moment. So the fact that we import 94% of soy protein from 3 countries is not food security at all. So we need to have EU crops to be autonomous in the proteins we eat. To grow the proteins we eat. That's I suppose the biggest figure we can give and the most sincere answer to your question.
Thank you very much. And what about you, Christine? Since you worked with farmers and you even interviewed them recently, what would you say?
Well, actually, it's really, and that's what I wanted to share also, and because it's really empowering and it's really it gives me a lot of hope, and I think everyone in this project a lot of hope. The farmers that we talked to that chose to diversify, to produce new crops, often without a lot of support, often without a lot of knowledge, a lot of like technical support from the official side, and sometimes taking on more debt. 40% still report an improvement on the economic situation. 45 say there's no change. A lot of them say they're still in an investment phase, or that they see potential if the value chains were improved, because for most of them, the missing value chains and an access to market is the big issue. But for me, my favorite number is that 70% of the farmers reported a positive impact on their quality of life, which is a big topic, especially for young farmers. So that's definitely my favorite number. And also a lot of the farmers that we talked to were young, or they were farmers preparing their farm to be taken over by the next generation. And they reported like a bigger sense of pride in their farm, and just more satisfaction, also to sell actual food to consumers. So actually, if it's not mandatory, but it's just better voluntary schemes, and like this rebalancing, and that it's just fairer, like Alessandro said, we actually see it as also a big win for farmers, for local food chains, for food security. So we really just see it as potential and not like that's what we say to the critics. And now we have kind of the numbers or some numbers to prove it, which is really nice.
Thank you. What about others? Any thoughts on this question? Olivier, please go ahead.
Yeah, two things. Among the farmers, we've got to acknowledge that the one that suffers most in terms of hours of work, in terms of pressure, in terms of suffering in work, it's animal farmers. So either way, it's a good deal for them to get out of this animal production and switch to plant-based production. And for those who want to keep up with their works with animal, but we've got to change, etc. In the coming years, a lot of farmers will go to retirement. So it's a good opportunity actually to help the young people who want to become farmers, to tell them, okay, you got like the pig sector, the poultry sector, which is just atrocious, and you will never make a living out of that. Or you've got the opportunity to choose plant-based food. And it's a strategic choice. It's crucial because it will define their lives and their livelihoods, etc. So you get from the beginning to tell them to choose wisely. And this is a message of hope to send them, and also a message of like being realistic.
Thank you. And Clemence?
Yeah, I would like to add one point to what has already been said, is that actually CAP subsidies does not benefit farmers very much, but rather those around them, like upstream companies such as feed and equipment supplier, banks, various service provider, and as well as downstream industrial actors who buy animals, milk, eggs, and other products at lower price on the ground that public money cover the losses. So I think it's something we don't talk enough.
Maybe what I can add to the conversation is we need to be able to communicate this change in a way that it simply pays off for us, for all of us. We also need to very much use the language that highlights the benefits. It was already said. We need to build a bridge, include stakeholders in the conversation, and also it's really interesting that the previous speakers were also saying about that the average age of a farmer in Poland is now 57 years old. So we are really at the stage of the crucial change that will happen in the coming years in Poland itself. We also must remember that in Poland, 60% of the chicken meat and as much as 80% of the beef is produced for export. So it gives the perspective of how everything is structured.
Thank you very much, everybody. We don't have too much time, but we have time for a couple of questions, and we have some of them in the Q&A box. So if you have more questions, you can still add them, and we will see if we have time for them. But Yvonne is asking about the transition scheme under the CAP Agri Environmental and Climate Action, Article 10. So how can we advise farmers on how to apply for it? Anybody has insights on this? Christine, please go ahead.
Yes, I mentioned it earlier, and I said that there is, for now, a lot of uncertainty around the procedural side of this, and also if it will be a similar procedure in each member state. What we are asking Parliament to do is to advocate for like a very clear procedure that is like a template to apply for the farmers, that is easy accessible, not too much administrative burden, and also to take into account or to prioritize these diversification plans. So as soon as we know more, we will share more. For now, farmers we cannot really tell them how to apply for it, because I think even the Commission doesn't really know what it would look like, but we're asking them to come up with more criteria.
Thank you. And then another question, how should the conditionality mechanism be adjusted to facilitate more a plant-based CAP? Any views on this question? Christine or anybody else? Yeah, Christine, please go ahead.
Yes, I can improvise here a bit. I mean, we did ask for crop rotation to be included as a mandatory practice, but that's more for plant protein. That's not necessarily for moving away from animal production or diversifying. But I think what would be important is this notion of livestock density. Just saying, you can only have as much animals on the land, like as much as the land can hold, the natural, like respecting the natural limits. And then that might also then motivate farmers to look into other income streams. And then that's why we need also then diversification help to actually enable them to have another income stream. But so maybe this like reducing densities and then also making sure that crop rotation is there so that we push protein crops.
Okay, thank you very much. And Sabine, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just see the time passing, so I may just open maybe the floor to our panelists in case you have last words, comments, anything you would like to share before we close the webinar. And yes, I also just wanted to raise quickly that for the audience who may not be aware of that, there's also a part of CAP funds that are allocated to meat and animal products ads, actually to promote the consumption of these products. And if I'm correct, Olivier, you mentioned the shift in animal farmers. If I remember correctly, or just correct me if I'm wrong, I remember that once you said something like 50% of the animal farmers will be retired by 2030. Is that correct number? Because it's really huge indeed.
It's roughly half of them will be retired in the coming years. When I said coming years, I'm not sure whether it's 4, 5, 6 years, but like in very short time, like Morgan said, like in France at least, but it's the same apparently in Poland, and I guess roughly the same all over the EU. The average farmer is quite old, and so a lot of them will retire.
Okay, yeah, very, very good to know. Thank you. So yeah, any final words? Yes, Alessandro and Morgan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the CAP was designed around the system that was livestock intensive, and this happened because the animals were left out of the equation because there were no knowledge about their conditions in farms, and also the contribution of this industry to the climate crisis and to reducing the health of the population was not known. So now that the picture is clear, we need to transition the CAP into the future, and the evidence is striking, and we cannot ignore that any longer.
Just a quick last sentence from my side. Now that we've got the situation where the public funds is concentrated in industrial animal agriculture, we need to change it. We need to redirect the funding to make it serve climate, health, and biodiversity goals. Thank you.
And I want to add that ObSAF recently published a report on subsidies for insect farming in France. The report paints a very very bad picture of the use of public money in France. So for French readers, it's available on our website. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now sharing the link on the chats. That's great. Yes, so it's now time to close the webinar with few last maybe words that yes, we raised very important concerns about the cap misfunding and harmful subsidies currently ongoing, despite some efforts that are made, as Christine could raise. It's probably far from being enough right now. So we should definitely do more and better for animals, people, and of course, environment as well. So yes, again, I encourage you to endorse our joint statement that was shared previously on the chats that is going in this way. And we can also definitely agree that we as citizens need to know better where our funds go. We now know that they are not going really in the right direction. So we probably have a voice as well to ask for this change to happen. And yes, let's make public funds serve the public good. That would be my last words. So yes, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this webinar. Thank you so much, our panelists, for being there with us today, and to my great team for supporting this project at Food Forward Europe. Thank you very, very much, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
So much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.